As a neurodivergent creator, I post a lot of content that is neuroaffirming, namely affirming of neurodivergence and the challenges we face. And one of the common responses I get is that I'm trying to excuse harmful behavior by neurodivergence. And actually, I want to reframe that and point out that it is an explanation, not an excuse. It's an invitation for compassion. It's a recognition that everybody in our society, neurotypicals and neurodivergents alike, are fighting their own battles with their own inherent challenges. It's a recognition that there is a natural degree of variation in terms of abilities, and neurodivergents tend to have a spiky neurocognitive profile, meaning neurotypicals have if we think of it like a wavelength of strengths and weaknesses, there are some, mild peaks and mild dips in terms of natural strengths and weaknesses or challenges among people who are neurotypical. But among neurodivergents, it tends to be spikier, more extreme, greater strengths and greater challenges. And that is at the core of why many neurodivergents struggle to function or to succeed in neurotypical society. One of the common examples of this spiky neurocognitive profile is how we struggle with executive dysfunction, organizing, planning, time management, regulating our emotions, a lot of the things we need to function on a day-to-day basis and in workplaces, schools, and relationships. Those are real inherent challenges that we face. It is a documented and scientifically researched thing, and it is not a personal choice. We live in a society, a lot of us live in meritocracies where rugged individualism is praised and held up as the ideal, and everybody's responsible for their fate. And if you didn't succeed and if you struggle, it's because of inherent flaw or moral failing on your behalf. And science argues otherwise. Our brains are all built differently, and neurodivergents tend to have this spikier neurocognitive profile, whereas neurotypicals, they don't have the extent of challenges that neurodivergents do. Now, that there is going to be individual variation among both neurotypicals and neurodivergents, but the variation tends to skew a lot more extreme with neurodivergence. Hence, we struggle with a lot of stuff. And so recognizing that is not trying to offer a whole pass for people who engage in selfish, inconsiderate, antisocial, hurtful, or harmful behavior. I want to draw a distinction here. Now, struggling with executive dysfunction, for example, can result in those things, but it doesn't always necessarily do. Yes, if somebody consistently shows up late for a commitment, it impacts a workplace, it impacts a relationship. That is probably inconsiderate and selfish. Yes, they can be legitimate excuses or reasonings as to why that's happening for the neurodivergent, but at some point they have to take responsibility for their time management skills and, build in time buffers, set reminders, find scaffolding techniques to compensate for the challenge that they have. That is a responsible thing to do, and all adults in our society are responsible for self-management with regards to that kind of stuff. But it doesn't override the fact that that is an inherent challenge, and maybe a little bit of consideration and compassion might be due to that person. We do need to recognize the impact of that behavior, especially if there's a pattern of it, on individuals, on social organizations, on workplaces, at schools. It does impact other people. We want to take responsibility and put the onus on the individual at some point for finding ways to succeed. That said, our environments, our society, our social groups can offer scaffolding or extra supports or extra kindness or consideration in helping those people manage those challenges. Making accommodations, for example. And accommodations shouldn't be seen as an imposition that impairs or impacts other people negatively. I've had people say to me, oh, well, you make accommodations for people in workplaces and they're going to take advantage of it, and then our profit goes down and we suffer. And I'm like, for the most part, most accommodations aren't going to do that. We're not expecting lower productivity as neurodivergents. We're not expecting, extreme accommodations that, for the most part, most of us don't, that are going to impact the bottom line. I think it's a gross exaggeration to assume that to offer accommodations to somebody is going to have such a substantial impact. That said, if that behavior is, like I said, selfish, inconsiderate, antisocial, hurtful, or harmful, there needs to be recognition of that and accountability taken by the person who's doing it, regardless of their neurotype. I have two examples of this, ADHDers in my personal life in the past, where their behavior was, as I would consider, to be inconsiderate and selfish. I had a friend who said he wanted to spend time with me, would reach out to me, would do a lot of texting back and forth, but when it came to actually planning and initiating and actually hanging out, never would follow through. Would always say we should hang out, and then when I actually tried to make plans with them, they would flake. One day I said to them, hey, let's go hiking at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And the response was for them to look kind of flustered and say, well, I have to do my laundry tomorrow. And I was like, you could do it before, you could do it after. 10 a.m., the hike is only maybe 2 hours tops. You have the whole day. And this person, I guess, because of executive dysfunction, was very flustered about managing their time. Oh, but I need to stay up that night and then game, and then I'm gonna wake up late and I won't have time to do my laundry. And I was like, well, why don't you go to the laundromat the night before or the morning of, and play your Switch, take your Switch with you and play your games there. Like, simple solution. And this friend was like, oh, that's a good idea. Didn't follow up on it. I offered many solutions and accommodations to their executive dysfunction related challenges, and they just refused to take me up on it. And this person, I believe, had also codependency. So they didn't want to assume a lot of responsibility and have healthy boundaries in their relationships or in their life, generally speaking. It was always, if I asked them to do something, they'd have to go see, what is my roommate doing? Because I always want to tag along with them. I have to be attached at the hip to my roommates. There was clearly codependency going on there. And it was like, they would not want to commit to a single plan with me because they were still waiting to hear back from their roommates about their plans because they would prioritize them. At some point, I just went, I'm not bothering with you anymore, and I stopped replying, and then they felt really rejected, and then they came back to me and said, what's going on? Why aren't you messaging me? And it's like, buddy, the writing is on the wall here. Like, you don't walk your talk. You keep talking about wanting to hang out, and yet you don't show up. And you're always inconsiderate about my needs in the friendship, about, being able to plan in advance and do something together. If you are living a very solo life that's self-centered or self-focused, you could do whatever you want on your own schedule, but at some point you have to come to the table and plan in conjunction with other people and consider their needs. So I let go of that friendship. I had a roommate, very scatterbrained, refused to clean. I tried to make accommodations. Hey, do you need reminders? Do you want to schedule a chore chart on the fridge? Because we do need to clean, the house gets messy. And then she refused to do that and follow through, and then would complain that the trash was full. Of course, she would come, use her takeout containers, eat her food, treat the house as a hotel, the apartment as a hotel, and would dump it and then fill up the trash, but then wouldn't take it out. And of course, because of like ADHD, short-term memory impairments, she'd have this form of amnesia where she wouldn't really recognize the mess that she was leaving, and would perceive it to be our fault because me and the other roommate we were studying at the time, at home more often than she was. But she was also equally responsible for contributing to the trash and also for taking it out, but wouldn't do so, and then would complain about the smell. And I would think, hey, like, you also have a responsibility here. Why do you expect us to assume responsibility? Well, I'm at work all day. Yeah, but the time that you're here, you're still contributing to the mess. And she would leave food to rot in the fridge. She would buy a whole bunch of stuff, not cook it, not use it, leave takeout, and it would start to get mold. And of course, the mold spores could spread to other food, and it could contaminate our food. So I'd always have to throw it out. We had a mouse get into this roommate's food, and they made a big mess, and she would never check her cupboard. So I discovered it by accident weeks later with a festering mouse carcass in there. It was horrible, horrible. I could smell it, but she was barely around to smell it herself and notice it. And she'd buy stuff and again forget that she'd bought it and wouldn't check her cupboards. And loveliest person, but that behavior to me was inconsiderate and selfish, and I got very frustrated. And at the end, I was glad that we parted ways, because I was like, I understand that you're struggling with executive dysfunction, that you, in your downtime, you don't want to have to deal with these day-to-day routine activities or responsibilities, but you've chosen to live with other people and you have that responsibility. So that's an example where executive dysfunction, neurodivergent related challenges, bleeds over into selfish and inconsiderate behavior. And we don't want to excuse that. If it impacts other people or harms other people, that person has, the onus is on them to take responsibility for their actions and how it impacts other people. Not to make excuses, not to say, oh, it's my executive dysfunction, and not go, okay, well, how do I, solution-focused mindset, how do I find ways to actually address this problem and rise above it? So have you struggled with these kinds of challenges? Have you seen them in other people? How have they impacted you? Where do you draw the line in terms of asking for compassion and then going, well, this is where I assume responsibility? I would love to hear from you.